We hear of a coming revolution in agriculture that could heal the planet and save the farm. This new system builds beneficial soil biology and structure rather than break it down. It takes carbon out of the air and locks it into the soil where it can provide fertility, prevent erosion, and hold water. A handful of pioneering farmers had developed this soil building system to make their farms more profitable. But could it be a major tool in moderating global warming? How does it save farmers money? Could the resulting increased health of our soil make us more healthy? Could this make farmers the heroes of the 21st century? Hello, I'm Paul Katona. With all the bad news we hear about climate change and farmland collapse, this new system seems to promise solutions. Please join me as I look at these questions and the people involved in a farming revolution in southwest Missouri. Austin Livingston invited me to see the start of his Mule Barn farm, a no-till truck garden near Sparta, Missouri. We made a visit and I asked him what he was up to.
I'm trying to regenerate the soils that we have out there and use them to grow as high quality produce as possible. Less work for the most amount of output that I can and profit that I can. This is our 2 acres that we planted with the tractor. It's a 21 species mix, mainly for a summer cover crop. There are vegetable varieties in there that I will pick as much as I can. This is called Mule Barn Farms. That's my grandpa used to answer the phone Mule Barn for no reason whatsoever. I've been blessed with very good grandparents who both lived on farms, and they both did garden for all their life, and I was exposed to that growing up pretty regularly, and something about it I really enjoyed watching things grow and planting. I just always have enjoyed that, and giving away stuff is one of my favorite things to do. For the first year I'm extremely pleased. It's exceeded my expectations. This was all an old hay field that hadn't been hayed. It was just weeds and grass for continuous for many years, ever since we've had it, and I'm sure before then. It would rarely get mowed or brush hogged, so grass would grow, it just die. So this is the first year after terminating that, and I'm extremely pleased with how it's turned out. My grandpa, they lived in Gainesville, which is southeast of here, and he had a large corn patch, and that's kind of what he was known for in Ozark County. He raised some pretty good corn, and we've got pictures of me real young, helping them and shuck the corn and plant and everything. So I was exposed to it from a pretty young age, and I just kind of continued the passion, and it's grown to this, and trying to make it a little less work and a little more nutritious, I guess, if I can make it work like that with this system that I'm working towards. Let's go back here and kind of show you the difference between 2 different previous land uses. Just obviously continuing right here is a hay field. As we get farther back, some of the spots have been tilled before, and you will immediately notice a difference between the weed pressure between this. If you look in here, there are weeds, obviously, but you're seeing all different leaf structures, leaf sizes, all from the brassicas, from the sunflowers to the buckwheat, all of that. I see very minimal weeds back in here. I don't really consider much a weed, really. There are some certain species like poke. We've got some poke out there that I do not want in here. Other species aren't as bad. They don't spread as bad. They're green, they'll photosynthesize, they're pumping carbon into the ground. I do control them, but I won't spray anything to get them all the hand weeding. I'll just cut down the poke as best I can. That's the main threat, main problem weed right now, and recurring grass, which will need to be dealt with, but that was inevitable with the previous land use history. Like everything, there are some problem areas. Right here where the grass wasn't completely killed off, you can see that it's coming back, and there's little sections throughout here where it was me, I didn't get a good job spraying it. but the planter went right through and stuff's trying to grow. But the biggest thing that I found is when you have a sod forming grass, that is the most harmful to getting anything to grow. It just seems to suck the life. People say you can't grow things close together. That stuff is doing just fine. Obviously you saw radishes, turnips, all those, buckwheat, sunflowers, and they're doing just fine. But when you stick a grass in there for some reason, it just seems to really inhibit the growth and not letting it get as much out of it as it could.
What did you use to kill the grass?
I did use glyphosate. That was the only option I had. I could have gone organic. I am a college student. It was a lot more pricey. I used a 2.5% one-time application. That was it, by hand. I did it all by hand. I do it as responsible as I can. I've done it a lot for employers and stuff, so I do know what I'm doing. I don't like doing it, and eventually that's why we're starting out with this as a cover crop, is because as we progress from season to season with cover crop to cover crop and all that stuff, the herbicide use will go down greatly.
Well, let's see what else you got.
Okay, let's go back here. So all this was planted the same exact day, all 2 acres, all this behind me. As we saw kind of up there, everything looked better than it does up here. This ground was tilled not last year, but the year before that. And you can see the weeds and grass are a lot more prevalent than out there. It's not, I mean, it's about half the height maybe, so it's not being able to grow. And farther down there as well, it's been tilled several years ago, and it's the same way. So tillage does make a long-lasting impact, in my opinion. All these plants are summer annuals. They're no perennials. These sunflowers obviously will die out. There's some pumpkins in here. All these brassicas, they're already starting to flower and go reproductive, so they don't have too much left in them. So I will probably have to spray some of the problem areas with the heavy grass, where I know that the cover crop will not be given an upper hand. But most of this will just drill right through it and plant a cover crop on 7.5-inch rows, a very high diversity cover crop, as high diversity as I can from our local seed dealer.
So have you graduated from Missouri State?
Yes, I graduated this May with my undergrad, and now I'm starting this summer. I have a research project for my thesis for my master's. I'll start classes in this fall.
Very good. What's your master thesis going to be?
It'll be kind of this. It'll be measuring okra and green bean nutrient and soil health, all that stuff, over different cropping systems. Well, a couple years ago, I was an intern for a wildlife biologist down towards Branson, and he was following this system of regenerative agriculture. He calls it the buffalo system, and that was the first I'd ever heard about it, first I knew about it. That's just something that hadn't come across my plate at all, and it kind of caught my eye of how he was getting the results that he was on the hillsides near Branson. I mean, it was very, very rocky, very steep, and he was growing good food plots for the deer mainly, but still he was growing stuff very, very well with no tillage, no fertilizer. It was pretty incredible. And so through him, I was able to do hands-on experience, gain that through him with planting and cover crops and all that. And he gave me a lot of names to learn, like Ray Archuleta and Gabe Brown, and I've learned from them immensely. It's been incredible how much I've learned from those guys just through online talks that they've given, and so it's kind of just shaped from that. And I knew that I would never have the land to do an actual ag setting, large ag fields. So I kind of transferred it into what I've been used to, and that's gardening. And so I kind of just tried to transfer as much knowledge as I can, and how could it be beneficial to growing produce and get the same results of minimal weeds and no fertilizers, as little synthetics as possible. And I thought that would be beneficial for a garden, so I wanted to try it out. We got zucchini and all different kinds of pumpkins, green beans in there. So I'm hoping that once they start producing here in a few weeks, that I'll be able to get in there and harvest as much as I can. But like I said, this, even though there are varieties in here that I can harvest, this mainly is thought of as a cover crop.
How's it feel to be finally working on your farm?
Well, it's really good. I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it more than I thought I would. Actually, for some reason, I grew up in the city all my life, but having some great grandparents who's gardened for all their life, it's kind of been passed down to me, and I've really taken it up and tried to absorb all the information they've taught me and combined it with what I've learned in school and through employers, and tried to turn it into this, and hopefully kind of try to garden a little differently than most and try to get the most out of it for the least amount of work and the most nutritious produce that I can.
Well, thanks for bringing us back to your farm.
Oh, I appreciate you coming back.
You've talked to us about regenerative farming, but tell us exactly what that is and what underlies it.
Well, kind of my definition of what I'm trying to do is create almost an ecosystem from a plot of land, and what I'm trying to do is to turn a previously unproductive plot of land into a very productive plot of land through growing plants, through soil health, microbiology, and everything like that. So what I'm trying to do, and the way I would define it, would be try to replicate nature. So as many plants growing at one time and as long throughout the season as possible to extend the growing season.
And you don't plow?
No plow, no till, no disc, no scraping the surface, nothing. So everything that I will do from now on would be with a no-till drill, as minimal soil disturbance as possible for retaining moisture, for retaining biology. I don't want to kill all the beneficial microbes, earthworms, insects in that top 3 inches maybe of soil, which is where most of them are. And I don't want to disturb that. I won't plow or I won't remove the plants that are there now for the next season, so that all that above ground biomass that the plants have created will just go straight on top of the soil and will decompose, dry out, whatever, over the winter. And next spring I will drill through all the plant residue and place seeds right into the soil.
So that plant residue helps the soil by keeping it covered?
Yes, and that does moisture. You retain moisture by having plants on the ground, plants growing to keep evaporation as minimal as possible. But having soil coverage is probably the number one thing in my book that I'm going for weed suppression as well. The more shade you have, the more amount of biomass you have covering, the less likely weed seeds will be to germinate through that cover. So that's what another benefit through this system that I'm hoping through the years I will be able to see a drastic difference in weed pressure, and which we already have in one area that was tilled previously and then not tilled, and can see the difference. When you guys were here last time, we came at the very beginning of the season pretty much. So this field was primarily buckwheat. That's what you saw last time. So now you're kind of at the end of the season where everything has fully matured. Certain species are still putting carbon in the soil. They're still photosynthesizing, and they will until frost or when I choose to terminate this crop. You can just see how plants help each other out when they're just planted all together. They're not hurting each other. They're really trying to help each other out, I believe. and it's done a pretty good job of that, I think. So when you have different plants with different root structures, different nutrient requirements, you don't run into an issue. The only issue would be moisture, but your longer tap roots can tap into moisture farther down, and with this system, with no-till and having a cover on the soil, you're not going to run into moisture issues as much as you would with a conventional tilled system, that's for sure, and what I've learned over the past couple of years. As we talked about last time, this is an area that has been previously tilled, not in the past couple years, but I think the last time was 3 years ago. But stuff doesn't look as healthy. You can see that. It's a lighter shade of green. The weed presence is much higher in here as well due to that seed bank from having exposed soil. But yeah, you can definitely see the long-lasting impacts of what tillage has done to this part of my operation in particular. We know and love, we have a whole bunch of rocks. So this, and I'm not a soil reader, I don't know how to get too much from a soil sample, and there's a worm right there. And so if we tilled that, that's, you know, the top half inch maybe. So we would have probably ended his life if we would have tilled today in preparation for the winter. But that, to me, looks extremely compact. There's layers.
How's the color?
And it almost looks like ridges and layers of soil that has been, you know, compact over years of tillage, because this was probably tilled, I'd say maybe 5 or 6 years before last year. I think maybe once in the spring and in the fall. So that's not the best in my opinion, I don't believe, but it's what we have to work with. It'll be interesting to see kind of what some others samples throughout other places on the property look like compared to this. This is the start of where the hayfield was. So this part has never been tilled. Obviously, in this little area, I did not get a very good kill with my herbicide. Maybe a pretty close example of how the soil was before it. Let's see if we can. But there, you see, I went a lot farther without hitting a rock, just because this hasn't been tilled, and that could have just been the spot. But and I'm not a master soil reader by any means, but there's rocks in there, and you can see a lot more root activity even in that. There's a whole bunch of roots still, no worms in that piece, but there's a whole bunch of plant material even in that, just because that's not been tilled. It's pretty dry to me.
It's drier than the other one?
Almost, and the reason I think that could be is because that has plants that had multiple species of plants, multiple canopy, plants throughout different canopy layers, while this is, a monoculture grass almost. Let's see here. I'm trying to find a spot that had several. This looks like it has several plants growing around it throughout the season. Right there we've got a worm. And it's still not the best. I mean, I wasn't expecting a drastic improvement in soil over one season. So, but you can see too, off of this maybe, the layer of grass that was on it and that I killed, that was covering the soil. And even when I pull it, the roots, I mean, it's not just laying on top. I'm tugging on it right now. And the roots were still in the soil. So that they would be dissolving, getting composted by earthworms and microbes, and all that material will decay over time and go back in the soil. And that's kind of what and there's another worm too. And there's another one. And they were all, in the top 6 to 8 inches.
Does it seem moisture to you?
It might be a little bit. Yeah, it is more moist than both others.
Compacted?
But overall, I'm not completely sure. I got a mosquito. There's another worm. So it's just, I like seeing those guys because they're working for me.
So regenerative farming, you don't plow, so you have to take care of weeds. So we talked about the necessity of having to use a herbicide.
Yes. There was no alternative other than plowing, and I knew I wasn't going to do that. So what I used was glyphosate, a 2.5% mixture of glyphosate to knock it down. And I will still use that. That's the cheapest way for me. It's the most effective way for me to control weeds, and it's not organic. But I choose to believe that following this system like I have is more beneficial for the produce, for the plants, for the wildlife, for the microbes and the soil than it would have been tilling and continuously tilling to control weeds. That would have put our soil back so far compared to using a herbicide path. So through the years that I plan to do this, pairing it with a very high residue cover crop of cereal rye, turnips, radish, a whole bunch of different species that create very high residue, kind of a mat over the ground, we will eventually cover up, or we will start to cover up and build. Some argue that it's not soil. You can't build soil, that fast. It takes a whole long time. I don't care. You can argue that all you want. I just know that what I've seen through my experiences and places that I've worked, I don't care what you call it, but through years of having a high residue cover crop, there is a substance and a mat that has covered rocks, has covered weed seeds, and it has eventually almost totally eliminated the herbicide use of some farms. And so through this, pairing it with a cover crop, eventually I hope to not have to use any herbicide at all. But I like seeing the soil coverage of the previous grass or crop, if you will, on the soil surface, even with roots intact. So that's what I plan to do with all this stuff, is just let it lay on the ground and die and decompose and feed the microbes and worms. When you have an active soil that feeds on things, eats and dies, just a constant cycle turnover, you're going to be getting rid of a lot of negative things a lot quicker than a plowed field, for sure. I think next year I've got a pretty good plan of what I will choose to do and how to make it easier and more profitable for me. And we'll see what we can learn next year like I have this year.